So thank you for the introduction. Great introduction. It's probably a couple of my first slides here. So really, Stefan, introduced working at the speed of COVID, as it were, which is something that has come up recently, right, in 3M. So a little bit about myself, like you said, is I am a technical content leader at 3M within the personal safety division. And I work with content related to products such as hard hats, earplugs, face masks, or respirators, although nobody probably knows what those are, right? Maybe more and more nowadays. So I do have a background in technical writing, a few degrees from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities around this with a science background, and really leading some of this content management and data adoption within 3M for the personal safety division. Also just note, and doing this during COVID too, while trying to keep 2 children home. That was fun. So just to highlight. So really what I wanted to go over is, discuss the problem. How did this how and what was the problem at 3M within the personal safety division for when COVID hit? What our plan was, and maybe some changes to our plan, how we measured whether that was working, and really our big lessons learned. So when COVID first came out, where we started to hear about it was in the end of December. And we started to create content. We didn't have a lot of content for this specific topic created previously, although we did have some guidance that we had for other similar situations or environments where there might be a virus, where you could use some of our respiratory protection equipment and other personal safety equipment, depending on the industry. But we found that based on certain guidance and certain information that was available, that we did have to make it specific to COVID-19. And in order to facilitate or create the best content for our customers and our users, we had to create a variety of documents. And so, spanning from more of the topic-specific kind of bulletin format to more of a question and answer, maybe some tip sheets on that actual topic or how to use our products, as well as full reference guides for those that needed the full information. And so our content types were not just one, right? It spanned multiple types. So it was challenging at first to determine how to really do this in a way where our content was always up to date and then always consistent across those. And one thing that we ran into was that we had 3 audiences. We usually create content for occupational use, meaning our products are usually used in non-healthcare workplaces or healthcare workplaces, and our guidance really centered around that. And now, during this pandemic, we had some of the general public using our products. And so we wanted to, of course, start with reuse. We knew that was an efficient way to manage our content. But because we had new information from that topic, but then a new audience, and trying to map that reuse was very difficult. We had a spaghetti mess of, well, what about this? Then that could go here. But what about this content type? It could go here. What about this piece? What's the best level of reuse? Should we do it in chunks? Well, our documents for this are very kind of topic and product specific, so we have to write them so generic that they don't really make sense. So we ended up saying, okay, here's an image we can reuse. Great. Well, it wasn't great enough. So this posed a big problem for us to say, it's the same information across these 3 audiences, but what level of technical detail do we need to get into? If I say an N95 filtering face piece respirator, is someone in the general public going to know what I'm talking about? The same as maybe a healthcare person would, or maybe they call it something else. So we decided we've got a great cross-functional team. So let's rely on our subject matter experts to really tell us what we can reuse, and let's try to have them write it in a way for reuse. So we were able to remove some of the spaghetti mess, but it created another problem for us where it took a lot of time to have that cross-functional collaboration, which I'm sure everybody here knows. If there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, especially when you're trying to do something quickly, sometimes it's hard to accomplish your goals there, and it's more of a settling of, okay, let's just go with it for now because it's accurate and it's consistent, although maybe not reusable. So it's not necessarily easier for maybe a technical content group or a content manager, but it meets the need, the customer need, and the timing that's required in order to get that information out. So it just created a new problem. And again, we are looking at, okay, we can reuse this image, high fives, there's this small piece. But we decided that in seeing that our changes were happening every day, because new guidance, new information was learned every day. We wanted to keep our documents up to date, obviously. So the biggest thing was to enable that consistency so that we can make sure that our customers, the users of our products, or even just our information, always had the most up-to-date information online and available to them. So basically, if you have multiple people providing information and they don't know anything about writing for reuse or what tools that we use, because we handle that, they just provide the content, and then we have them providing it even faster to say, okay, did you make that change? Now we have to change it again. We had a very large problem, especially once we look back, we realized how big the problem was of trying to keep things up to date because we had 70 plus documents. So our plan was to start small. So we wanted to select documents that were similar. Instead of trying to look at, here's our whole collateral related to this topic, we wanted to start small and say, okay, what content really should be the same across this small subset of documents? Should it be all, a number one really, that this is the same sentence or same section that needs to be in all of these? Or is it something that, okay, for this audience, this is the information that we need, and then for this audience, here's the additional information based on maybe where their workplace is? Or is it something so specific for that document that it needs to stand on its own? So no reuse that we could find currently. So in doing this, we looked at our FAQs, our frequently asked questions. Frequently asked questions for the general public, for the non-healthcare workplaces, and for the healthcare workplaces. Whatever the question was, we should have the same answer. So this seemed like the best option. So we started with that small group. Of course, images were a slam dunk because we used the same ones where they applied. So for the products that healthcare facilities could use, we had those images, and if they were also available to non-healthcare workplaces or the general public, we reused them. Slam dunk right there. And then if there was any other graphical information sections just based on what we called something or how we stated a question, there was more reuse. And so that way, if a customer used these products at home, but also worked in a healthcare environment and wanted to see, okay, is it consistent? We made sure that the questions were stated the same and the answers were stated the same, as well as any warnings about using our products. That way we can ensure that they get a consistent message no matter what audience level they're choosing on our website. And so we were already migrating our content to Structured FrameMaker, and we had some of it existing that in Unstructured FrameMaker, and we found it was very easy to switch. So originally when COVID hit, we decided, okay, for the ones that we have time and that we had maybe already in Structured where it was an update, that was a logical decision to continue in Structured. But we did get into a battle of chasing our tail, so we had some documents in Unstructured FrameMaker. So when the time was right, when we actually had a moment to breathe, which wasn't often, usually at midnight, we decided, okay, we're gonna migrate this over. And it was a great effort by our team who were knowledgeable on what our content goals were, and so that we could make certain decisions very quickly utilizing a tool that has that WYSIWYG environment, although it does have the source environment where some of our writers or content managers were more familiar and more comfortable. So it was nice that we had both options, and I think it really helped to enable our success in switching between the two. We also were able to use content references or conrefs where we had the same question and answers, so that if we translated this, we could ensure that we could then also reuse the translations. It's a global pandemic, not just an English US one. So we wanted to make sure that whatever content we reused, we enabled the global environment of things and made sure that all of our content was able to have translation reuse where it made sense. And then one thing to call out too, as we started to look at this from our small subset where we really started for our frequently asked questions, we realized that depending on what level we create our topics at, we could then reuse those, instead of using a conref, reuse those sections within questions between our data maps. And so that was something that we're continually looking at for some of these other documents, where maybe if we write our topics in a way that is topic specific and has similar section titles, we can reuse them within data maps, maybe for general content related to here's guidance on respiratory protection for viruses or for wildfires. And so in looking at the different levels of reuse and really driving it as a matter of survival for the amount of content requests, rather than trying to train and collaborate with our subject matter experts, we were able to set this up in a way that helped keep our heads above water during this time. And Structured FrameMaker enabled that, as well as some options for publishing those documents in automation. So as you can see, there's no formatting behind the scenes here in a master page, which is what we had started with. But moving forward, we had an automation to that, so it saved a lot of time to ensuring a consistent look and feel for our documents as well. So really, the visual example of our process, we created these topics and tried to lump the questions in those similar topics, so we could either reuse with content references or reuse at the topic level within our data maps. Then we inserted those conrefs, right? A big one being a link to external information. So a lot of the time we realized that we linked to other documents that we had for further information. So you can see we have one to a main tech bulletin for the outbreak. And to type that in every time and to add that web address every time was kind of a pain. It was lengthy, and if the regulatory bodies that we look to that provide guidance that we update our documents for change their link because they publish a new guidance, we had to go back in and find everywhere that we created that, even if there wasn't reuse that we had baked in. So instead, with some of our documents, we actually reused our links. So that was one that we found as we were going through was high value, to ensure if we update one, then it can update across. So big value there. And then, we assembled our data maps, and then we have that automated output. So something that looked consistent and had our branding and the way that we wanted our information to be displayed. And so really, what did we look at to ensure we were on the right track and not just, sleep deprived and addicted to caffeine at this point, was looking at how we created our topics, how we reused our information. One being reusing the links made a lot of sense, but then reusing the questions. To really, we gained a lot of valuable feedback from the field that wherever that question may exist, whether it was an internal document, an external document, and for whatever audience, there was huge value there, because as soon as we had one update, it updated anywhere that it occurred in any document. And so we gained a lot of feedback, and that one was to really point it to, okay, the way that we're creating this information is a success. We were able to increase our reuse with using conrefs or topic reuse. And so in measuring that was another way that we really looked at success. And looking at our frequently asked questions, having those answers being topic specific without being overly specific, So a generic specific, if you will. We could reuse these in any general bulletin or frequently asked question, because can our disposable FFRs be shared? They should never be shared. Doesn't matter during COVID or otherwise. A disposable respirator should not be shared. So we saw reuse there where we didn't think maybe our subject matter experts had originally written for reuse. So that was also something that pointed to success. And then we assembled our data maps, and a big one that was a huge time saver, especially because we would constantly chase our tail for updates. As soon as we had one update, we'd have to update again. And we had baked in some variable content into our master pages when it was unstructured FrameMaker, such as a document title, a revision, the date, some other things that needed to be modified. We worked with a vendor called Scriptorium who helped create some SDS files where it would have that style guide behind the scenes, that template that would apply to our content without us having to worry about it. So we'd be able to hit publish, PDF, and out would come a nicely branded, formatted document. And that was something that we measured in regards to value of, okay, let's quickly try to set up a new document. If we set it up in unstructured FrameMaker or maybe using a different authoring tool, it took longer to ensure that some of those things were looked correct or were consistent. And maybe within our group, someone had made a change to a look and feel within one of those documents. And so really leveraging and leaning on this automated formatting really helped for that consistent look and feel. So we got really good feedback from our customers as well as our external and internal customers that they felt that it was good information, and they were shocked when everything looked the same versus if you click on one document and then you click on another and it looks vastly different. You start to question, when was this last updated? Is this something that I can trust as up to date per current guidance and things like that? So having a newer type of look and feel and a consistent one was another way that we measured it, but also that process time in formatting. So to really summarize, our big lessons learned, we had already started planning a lot of our user instruction content for reuse. And we had, as we had time, looked at some of these other customer focused or available externally, these content types, and looked across maybe large amounts in strategy. And then a pandemic happened. And so it's kind of, okay, throw that plan away. Smaller groups work better for us, especially during this time, because as soon as other changes came, they tended to, impact those documents the same. So in putting those smaller groups together, such as FAQs, it really enabled us to drive reuse and gave us the ability to drive process efficiencies and think about in the future and what works well maybe for some of our other content types that we hadn't planned to fit a structured authoring way. So changing from unstructured to structured FrameMaker was fairly easy. It was nice that there was the option of switching between unstructured and structured to think that out, as well as even then copying in information, as well as the different views that we had available for those who were comfortable with either the source authoring or more of the WYSIWYG or what you see is what you get environment. That we found very useful. It also, having structured content in that machine readable format, XML, saves time when we're translating, because then we can again re-leverage the automation of the formats at the end, rather than either paying a translation vendor to lay out the translated documents or ourselves, which we hardly had time to do. So thinking about outside of just English and outside of this country, getting into other countries and languages, it saved time and money. And reuse is really critical for a fast changing environment, whether you're going through a pandemic, a regulation change, or a lava lamp of a product that needs to be updated quickly. Reuse is critical. Reuse drives consistency. it's something that at any level, it's good to think about. And starting small is how 3M Personal Safety Division, one of the ways we were able to keep up to date on changes that came from, it seemed, every direction. So questions?
We've got a question from Don asking about whether you're using a component CMS or AEM.
Currently, we're using AEM. We're just starting to migrate.
Or more accurately, a component CCMS, which is AEM or another one.
we are currently migrating to AEM. Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, cool. So now we're it's only 20 minutes after we started, so that's a little bit of a long gap now to the next session.
Well, I'm kind of curious about. Yeah, you were very compact. You were very structured.
Very fast.
Very structured, and trying to think about everybody's lunch for those times it fell there. No.
Yeah. Well, so I have just out of curiosity, just because I already know the answer to the question, how many people in the audience know what 3M stands for? We'll do trivia, at least one little piece of trivia there. and
I'll
Teeghan,
show the logo
I assume, yeah, I would assume, Teeghan, that you already know the answer to that question.
Definitely.
Yeah, nobody runs in there. Wow. Thought we'd get lots of people answering that one. So that would be Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, owing to the long, long history of the company as a major employer in the state of Minnesota here in the States. That.
And surprisingly, we do more than just create respirators in the personal safety.
Yeah, there we go. A couple of people. Oh, you know what? I will apologize. I forgot. There is, just so all of you know, there is a bit of a buffer in between the broadcast. It's kind of like what happens in a radio broadcast, that there's processing that goes on. And so there we go. Now we get a bunch. So we've got, we had Janelle came in, Jane came in, a couple people knew that one right there. Yeah, that's great.
I just noticed there are actually two websites that how you can access us with this specific company. You can type in the number 3m.com, or you can type in mmm.com, and both works. And mmm.com is forwarded or rerouted then to 3m.com.
Yeah.
And Angie, I think if you want to actually see our content that we've created, if you go to 3m.com/coronavirus, that is our website where all of this content does live.
Oh, excellent.
So if you'd actually like to see the working models there. Yep.
Yeah, Angie Roberts mentioned one of the ways that I had research on that when I was in school was the story of not an urban legend, but just the legend of the Post-it notes being kind of a mistake in searching for one kind of adhesive and realizing that there was this temporary removable adhesive that they could put on this paper when it was actually supposed to do something else entirely.
Definitely. We have a huge background in adhesives for sure. Yeah.
Oh, Bernard, that was not nice putting in M in there. Now I have to think of these small chocolate things with the nut inside.
There was a lot of chocolate eaten during that time. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So do we have any questions from the audience? Is there something you would like to know about how 3M is working?
So we do have. So Susan asked a question. So in terms of the story that you gave us today, so how long did this transformation take, and how many people? Probably good to break out how many people internally were involved, and then because you did mention Scriptorium briefly, how many contractors, in addition to your internal staff, were involved in the transformation?
Well, so ahead of time, we were looking at really transferring and automating our technical content before this happened. And so we had partnered with Scriptorium ahead of time to create these outputs, which was very fortunate for us that we had these at our disposal to really automate that process, because it just so happened that a lot of our content was going to be in that format, whether it was a technical bulletin or a frequently asked question. So, so that was ahead of time. Really, this whole process, which is still an iterative process, started in December, and I think we really got our feet underneath us in July, to be honest. There was a lot of efforts. There was myself as well as a few members of my team who were involved, which I believe they're on. Shane Rose, Miranda de la Victoria, were really hands-in on this. We had also representation for our Latin America team in navigating, because it was globally a similar issue, right? In creating this content, we needed to get it for all users. So we had a global subject matter expert team that we met daily with in order to really get that feedback and those updates. So, but there was really 3 of us, and then we had some outside help from a few other teams here and there when it was necessary.
Great. Yeah, there was a question also from Don asking whether, so the style sheets that were developed, is that something that you managed mostly internally? Is that something that you contracted for to develop and modify all your style sheets? And where does that expertise sit now after the fact?
So I struggled through to try to figure out how to create one on my own, and it's my own learning gap, I think. But we partnered with Scriptorium, so we actually sought outside help for that, and worked as a larger team actually within our personal safety group, within our some of the tech writers that were available and content managers. And so that was a larger team effort to really look at those. And then our smaller kind of COVID team that really utilized them. And so now we can make small modifications where it makes sense, things that we find as we start to create content that we didn't have examples of along the way, and starting really to use it where we can tweak it. But if there's anything that's huge, then we probably would send that out again.
Yeah, I'm guessing
there's also an interesting question coming in from Brian Popp. He asked in the Q&A board, have you had any issues with authors making inappropriate changes to reused content without knowing all the context where it's used? Is this where the small group recommendation comes into play?
Yes, that's exactly where I believe having small groups of documents and having not as many authors involved in maybe those groupings where there's changes. One thing that we had to do is make them region specific. So there's going to be localization changes to the content. And that's where we expanded to more of a global team outside of that reuse. So that is an issue we could run into because they're not using structured authoring globally yet. But in using these smaller groupings of documents, usually, again, when you had to update one, you had to update all of them. And seeing that it was a content reference across those small groups or those subsets of documents really gave the, I think, a trigger to the authors that, okay, we can change it here and it's going to change in these other places.
Okay, there's another question. Please go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, there's another question from Ross. Have you implemented any metrics around measuring your new content effectiveness?
We've really focused on process time as well as the amount of documents that we're processing. So the amount has gone up greatly, especially since we just have this influx of pandemic content or COVID content to help give guidance around that, as well as we've been able to decrease our process time because of reuse and because of automated formatting. When it comes to actually measuring the reuse or the, a specific time trial of, okay, how long does the formatting save you? We haven't gotten to that level of granularity yet. But in looking at the overall time, we do have a few processes in place that allowed us to kind of run those metrics.
Yeah. There's also a question from Jared Hess. How does structured content save money while translating content? I understand how content reuse can, but does structure give you something more than just content reuse that saves money on translation costs?
So usually when you send to a translation vendor, if you send them an InDesign file or a different authoring file that has the layout of the content, sometimes they charge you a desktop publishing cost of laying that content back into that format and ensuring that things like text expansion for translation, that it fits well into the document. So you could be charged for that, as well as, if you have different versions of a piece of text that should be reused, you get charged for that. So that's where the reuse comes in. But what a machine readable format such as XML and having the ability to automate that formatting, we don't pay that desktop publishing cost. They send us back XML files of that language. We either set up the data map or they set up the data map, and we just hit the publish button. And it publishes maybe Spanish, French Canadian content the same way that it does English using that format. So the style guide or template that it has that automated formatting, the language doesn't necessarily matter. And so we still get that value. Yep.
Yeah, and of course it's also a little bit depending on the templates that you have where you render the XML content into. Especially when you think about languages like, let's say, Russian, which are much longer than in the number of characters than, for example, English, which is relatively short. And having a good template or good style sheet that is able to handle different text length flexible is, of course, an important thing to automate the publishing of multilingual content there as well. That can give you a lot of time savings and a lot of money savings in the end.
And you mentioned a moment ago that InDesign versus structured FrameMaker, where an unstructured FrameMaker document would have the same sorts of challenges as the InDesign document, perhaps not so many with less text frames, but an unstructured document carrying all that formatting information, not only in the sense of reflow, but also in sheer handwork because of the volume of the files that you're sending versus those unformatted structured documents that are much leaner and more prone to machine translation and translation memory. Correct.
Which also allows us to enforce or implement a technical library of terms that we want consistent versus if you have them maybe in unstructured content, you might miss a few, so they're not connected or highlighted to either not translate, right, as well. And so there's a little bit more of review.
Yeah, that ability to recognize those common pieces of previously translated content are hampered because of all of the mucking and desktop publishing that's involved with, from Word to InDesign or even to unstructured frame, that ability to do the inline and the ad hoc formatting.
Definitely. And Teeghan, there's another question from Nadine Murray. How far into your data conversion project were you when COVID-19 hit?
We had our templates, at least for the blue one that you can see here. We had some templates for our user instructions as well as the technical bulletins or frequently asked questions that you see here. And we were really starting to look at,
by the way, Teeghan, if I quickly might interrupt you. We were sharing the Q&A screen now, so people don't see your screen. If you want to show something, perfect. You would need to reshare your screen.
Oh, great. Okay. So for the documents, the FAQs I mentioned previously, that format in some user instruction or IFU templates for the information required to use a product, right, our procedures, that was really where we started, and we were just at the beginning of looking at that. We had just had those templates set up, and actually we're about to start migrating to AEM. And so when the pandemic happened, of course, we had to kind of switch gears and make sure that we were keeping up to date and keeping up to speed on the content requests that were coming in. So we learned a lot along the way. Yep.
Yeah. There's another question from Susan Beck. How long did this transformation take and how many people? The question is a little bit older,
So at the beginning, before the pandemic, I believe we had around 10 to 12 people really looking at, okay, how are we going to write our content for reuse and what content types, what's the scope, and establishing those formats, those templates for automation. And then when COVID hit, it was really mainly three of us. And I think it took a good 5 to 6 months to really have to see the content reuse level really helping. Where there was changes that affected those smaller subgroups of documents. So we noticed that we needed to do something when we took a breath at about February, March timeframe, and then we're able to make those changes and start seeing the benefits within 3 months. Switching over to structured content, really, and really seeing the value of having the templates and the automated publishing, we did that almost immediately just to survive.
Okay. And is the December 2019 to July 2020 timeline for the content migration process from unstructured to structured, or is that the AM implementation timeline? That's a question from Sylvie LaRose.
So that timeline was really where we were only really working on COVID content. And so it took about that time, not necessarily for the full switch, but to really have majority of that content in Structured FrameMaker.
Okay, and a quick intermediate comment. I see comments or questions coming in both in the Q&A pod and in the event chat. So we should decide for one of them. Otherwise, I cannot handle it anymore. Like Angel Roberts is asking in the event chat, and what was the training curve for the migration? How did you ensure team members had the appropriate trainings to proceed successfully? That's a perfect question for the Q&A pod. So if you have these kind of questions, folks, please put them in the Q&A pod. That becomes more easy to manage than which questions have been answered and which not, and because we can see that here. And in the event chat, we can do all kinds of other chatter, of course. So the question was, and what was the training curve for the migration? How did you ensure team members had the appropriate trainings to proceed successfully?
We really did some training ahead of time, thankfully, before the pandemic. We are involved very much so in conferences or online conferences such as Did a World. So there was already a knowledge base, which was great in regards to migrating. We did have regular meetings to see, okay, what's the best practice here? How would we solve this? Making sure team members were on the same page, right? But usually when something was set up, then we just went with it from there, just in regards to timing. So maybe there could be a little bit more alignment when we have time in the future to further implement reuse. But really it was active communication and previous knowledge that helped.
Okay, good. There are more and more questions coming in. Hope that's okay.
I saw a good one there, Stefan.
Sorry?
So Susanna was asking something that was a very pointed question. Is when you've got all of this content within DITA, you're managing everything within AEM, and then you need to publish that content. Are you using FrameMaker and its ability to use the publish pod and the STS files with all those stored settings? Are you using AEM for its publishing? Are you using perhaps FrameMaker Publishing Server? Or are you using another system outside of those three?
So right now, because we just got into AEM, so we're just starting that migration, it was just within Structured FrameMaker, and we use the publishing pod using those STS or template files. One thing that we're looking into later is or in the near future is using AEM with the FrameMaker Publishing Server in order to do that. But we do have that CMS connection. So if we wanted to use Desktop FrameMaker, we could still connect to AEM using that connection and pulling down that content. So if anybody within our team had the preference or there was a reason to use one or the other, we still would have that capability. We also potentially might have a plan in regards to some of our InDesign work in using a conversion to IDML in the future.
Yep. So following on with that, so and this is not to totally paraphrase what you guys are doing, but where 3M had perhaps a backload and where publishing with the publishing pod was slowing you down, moving or looking to move toward AEM, and or the Did Open Toolkit or FrameMaker Publishing Server, you might now have the ability to offload that processing time on the machines and be able to do things in an automated fashion, kind of take one less thing off of your plate for your authors, so they have one less thing that they're responsible for.
Definitely that potential exists, yes.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, you're still retaining the ability to produce those outputs. If you need a one-off or a customization on something, you could do that easily with the publishing pod without upsetting that whole system, that whole automated scheduled system that you might have in place to support everybody. Fantastic.
There was a question from Jeremy. Do you use any analytics tool platform to measure your content effectiveness? As a technical writer, we often focus on content creation but struggle with measuring effectiveness. But I think we already talked about that, right?
We don't use anything that really measures against maybe a dictionary at this point, or something that measures against established content best practices for certain terms or words that we use currently. But we have other ways to measure kind of the process time and how many requests that we're handling with the resources that we have and this strategy and software in place.
Right.
And you mentioned, earlier you mentioned that perhaps not a measure of effectiveness, but you've seen an increase in capacity, if I heard that correctly?
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of more capacity, if you will.
Yeah.
The decrease in the time it takes to get it online. And there's other ways to measure, I would say content effectiveness based on how many people are clicking on our links on our website. And then as well as we have a great group within our R&D area that is connected to our customers, that they give us very good feedback on what things are working, what things are not.
Yeah, and of course there's also Adobe Analytics, which is also plugged into with AEM, with Adobe Experience Manager. So you can use Adobe Analytics as well to get deep insights into how your content is used, from where it is used, from which devices it is used, how long people stay at the page and read the content, and how they interact with that. So all these kinds of insights can be measured with Adobe Analytics. Last year or the year before, we had a presentation from Palo Alto Networks, who is using that, I think, if I remember that correctly. And they measured, for example, the website traffic with Adobe Analytics and how it increased by providing better content in the technical documentation portal. And that wasn't, I don't remember the number, and I don't want to say anything wrong here now, but it was a huge number, a huge increase that they had achieved in terms of web traffic in their technical documentation portal. And they could measure that with Adobe Analytics very clearly and prove it to the upper management. Okay, Jeremy, I hope we answered your question more or less. So I close that.
He had another question as well, which was excellent and I think it's something that we covered a bit yesterday in some of the presentations, but with the ability of AEM to have a web portal to access some of this content. So perhaps for people that don't have FrameMaker environments installed on their computer, are you using FrameMaker exclusively to edit your content, or is there some percentage of editing using the AEM web portal?
Currently, we're still migrating, but that's the plan. Where a certain percentage will be located there so that there's global visibility for our other regions that create content as well, or want to reuse our content. Majority right now is in Structured FrameMaker.
Okay, and regarding Structured FrameMaker and publishing, there's a question from Susanna Kalisi. Is all of your publishing through FrameMaker using STS files?
Currently, right now it is, yes.
Okay. Well, I hope that was the answer you wanted to hear, Susanna. And there's another question from Sylvie LaRose, a follow-up question about timelines. If you are feeling comfortable sharing that with the audience, Teeghan, what is your timeline what is your implementation timeline for Adobe?
For AEM, barring any new pandemics, our plan is hopefully to have, I would say, 50% of our content migrated and thought out, which we've already started within around 6 months. But that's a very conservative, just kind of a ballpark number.
Okay.